Welcome back. We are now on the secret book of John, verse number 22. In our last video, we were talking about how the demiurge goes about to create flesh man, and then from there follows it up with taking part of the essence of Adam to bring about the creation of Eve, Adam's flesh partner. I do encourage you again, as always, to go back and listen to the other videos, as the secret book of John is a continuing story that builds upon itself. Here in verse 22 it says, "But when Yaldabaoth knew that they had withdrawn from him," and that's Adam and Eve, meaning that they became distant from him, emotionally perhaps, they came to see what Yaldabaoth's character was like, and they distanced themselves from him. Then Yaldabaoth in turn cursed Adam and Eve's earth. He found the female preparing herself for her male, to be with Adam, perhaps combing her hair, washing herself. He was lord over her. So this is saying that Yaldabaoth, or Demi-urge, had made Adam master over Eve. He did this for he did not understand the mystery which had come to pass from the holy design, and the holy design was that they would be equal to one another, male and female. This was a problem because ultimately it would lead to a division between the two because of that inequity. The example might be a table that's uneven. Well, eventually it's going to fall over. This is really what's being said here. And they were afraid to blame him. So in other words, they knew already what his character was like. They knew that he was an angry God or an angry being, and that he would retaliate or he passed judgment or punishment of some sort. And so of course they were afraid to approach him. And that's also possibly one of the other reasons they withdrew themselves from him. And it goes on, it says, "And he revealed his ignorance that dwelled in him to his angels." Now this is what I think leads to the seraphim that surrounded him to rebel, particularly one seraphim that came down, encouraged Eve to partake of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, meaning that perhaps she was told of her origin. Of course, this seraphim was moved by the Christ energy. And it goes on and says, "And he cast them out of paradise." So here you can see that he cursed their earth. He pitted them one against the other by making Adam master over Eve, which was not according to the original design. And then he cast them out of this place called paradise. And he clothed them with a dark gloom. So here it's referring to hiding them in darkness, so that they're not able to see the nakedness of who they really are. And nakedness in this case means there's nothing hidden. It's all revealed. All the truths are revealed. All the gnosis is revealed. But in this case, the demiurge does the opposite. He makes them shameful to know that. My interpretation is that this isn't about actually being physically naked, but rather it's an analogy to the idea that gnosis is having access to truth, and that it's revealed for you so that you can see and know all of it. There's nothing hidden about it. And so that's the nakedness. But to be ashamed of that is to deny it because of whatever reason. It might be fear of the demiurge or ridicule, so forth and so on. And the clothing part would symbolize hiding the darkness, the dark gloom, or ignorance. The demiurge goes about to shroud Adam and Eve in this darkness, so they don't understand. They don't see the truth that is within them or around them. "And the chief ruler saw the virgin who stood beside Adam, and that the living luminous epinoya appeared in her." This catches chief ruler's attention, and this is what everyone ultimately is seeking, even though they don't realize it, because they think that it's going to be had through having promiscuity or multiple partners, and it's through lust. They think they're going to be able to capture this light and have eternal fulfillment, but it will forever elude them. So this is what he becomes lustful for. He doesn't know why he's moved, but he's moved because of her beauty, because of the light, the essence of the illumination of the truth that's within her, that power. And so he gravitates toward her. Here's one of the places in Gnostic texts, also even in canonical texts, that does possibly suggest that the chief ruler is capable of appearing in flesh and actually taking on a flesh form. Some even go so far as to say the chief ruler is an actual man, meaning has an actual physical body. Although we understood through other Gnostic texts that aeons don't have bodies, they have soul bodies, and they have spirit. If they have gnosis, then that spirit is alive and awake. But if they don't, then they have a dormant spirit or an artificial spirit that guides them. Now this chief ruler saw the virgin who stood beside Adam, and that the living luminous epinoya appeared in her. And again, this is the truth, the thought, the essence of the first thought, that power that Yaldabaoth lost by breathing into Adam and Eve. And Yaldabaoth was filled with ignorance. So he didn't know this. He only knew that there was something about Eve that he found extremely alluring. So the progeny of the all knew that the chief ruler was going to take advantage of Eve and try to steal this light back. So he essentially goes and defiles her. He rapes her. But prior to that, the progeny leaves Eve. And again, this is to protect the light from being stolen back. When the progeny of the all knew, she sent some beings and they snatched Zoe from Eve. They took that part of her, that light part of her, and she was left with the artificial spirit. And the chief ruler defiled her. Now some believe that she was actually raped. We don't really know, it just says defiled. And he beget 2 sons for her. The first is Elohim, and the second is Yahweh. Elohim has a bear face, while Yahweh has a lion face. Now, notice these 2 names are play on Elohim and Yahweh. So Elohim has a bear face, while Yahweh has a lion face. The one is righteous, while the other is unrighteous. Yahweh is the righteous one, and Elohim is unrighteous. He set Yahweh over the fire and the wind, and again, this is the 4 elements that he uses, while he set Elohim over water and earth. He named them Cain and Abel with trickery in his mind. Now, what does it mean, trickery in his mind? The chief ruler has this idea that he can create Cain and Abel to be pitted against one another. And Yahweh, which represents Jehovah, which is created by the demiurge, would go about and kill Elohim, or kill Abel, which is Elohim. So that would mean that he's creating it so that Yahweh would be the righteous one. Elohim, which is the true father, would be the unrighteous one. This is the way he's setting it up. But he's also doing it where he thinks that he would be able to create Cain to kill Abel so that maybe he could also kill any kind of intuitive feeling about the Loam, or the true father, mother, in the pleroma. So this is what he thinks, and he has this sort of deceptive plan that I'm going to bring forth my 2 offsprings, and they're going to be pitted against one another, and one of them's going to represent me, the other one's going to represent this thing called the true father, mother, and that's going to be the unrighteous one, and I'm going to be the righteous one, and I'm going to kill the true father, mother, the ineffable. Now, he doesn't understand fully this idea of the ineffable, but something in his intuition tells him to do this, and so he goes about and does this, and then he brings about Cain and Abel. And of course, you know the story ultimately is that Cain does kill Abel. So now up to the present day, intercourse had continued from the chief ruler. So he introduced the first process of genetics so that everybody would be tied into this left and right dichotomy, and the 2 brothers would be at odds with one another. It would be founded in lust, not love, and it would also be founded in the necessity of life continuing through intercourse and offspring. And he planted a seed of desire in her who belongs to Adam. This is what he did. From intercourse he caused birth in the likeness of bodies, and he supplied them from his counterfeit spirit. So the counterfeit spirit is the soul part again. So you have the body and the soul. And the soul is the right-hand path, and the body is the left-hand path. They're going to be forever pitted against one another. And these are Cain and Abel. And remember, Cain goes off to the land of Nod, and then he has his offspring. He intermixes with the Gentiles. He has his offspring. Now that is, according to the secret book of John, they're the offspring of the demiurge and Eve. And of course, Abel didn't survive. And that's where the 3rd child of Eve comes about. And it continues and it says, from intercourse he caused birth in the likeness of bodies. And again, that's the genetic process. And he supplied them from his counterfeit spirit. He set 2 rulers over the principalities so that they might rule over the tomb. So what does it mean, over the tomb? It means that they will become the queen and king of death on earth. They're going to be the beginning of death, and they are the kings and queen. They have power and authority over that inception known as death. And it begins the first process of monarchy as well, and the whole necessity of making the paternal, the king, and the ruler, and having power over their offspring and their wife as well. The child comes about according to their karma, but up to this point there is no karma. But the character of an individual is born not only according to their astrological sign and their karma and dharma, so forth and so on, but also according to where the mother and father are when they're having intercourse in a particular part of their life. What are their emotions? What are their dreams and aspirations? So the child comes forth also to carry out that precarious dream from the mother-father. So they're living precariously through the child. At this point, Adam was in a place where something within him, perhaps he was moved by foreknowledge, which is one of the attributes or powers of Barbelo, if you recall, is that perhaps she had instilled in him something akin to foreknowledge, because it says likeness of his own foreknowledge, so that he could have a premonition of sorts that one of his sons had died and the other one, Cain, had been sent away in exile. And so he knew that he would have to set forth a progeny that would be able to carry forth gnosis, truth of the pleroma and the true father and mother, and Sophia and the Christ. And so this is what he does. And he sees that, he knows that within himself. So he is in a place spiritually where when he has intercourse with Eve, he's able to transfer that through the semen. And as a result, Eve bears a child with gnosis. He begot the likeness of the child of the human. And again, this is the likeness of Christ. The child of the human. He called him Seth. So Seth would be in the likeness of Christ, is what it's saying here, meaning that Seth would carry on the intention of Christ's will, Christ's work, which is the will of the Father, that he is manifesting through the Word made flesh. And so it's brought from the foreknowledge, which is Barbelo, through Sophia and the Christ, and then to Adam in his own likeness of foreknowledge to Barbella. And then that gnosis gets transferred into Eve's womb, and Seth is born. And he called Seth following the way of generation in the aeons. So in other words, this would be progeny of the pleroma, this child. And the other child, Cain, who had gone off, would be the progeny of Jehovah, or the demiurge. This is what you have. Likewise, the mother also sent down her spirit in the likeness of the female being who is like her. So this was not just Adam that was imbued with foreknowledge, but it also Eve was visited by Sophia, and she also sent down her spirit into the likeness of the female being who is like her, as a counterpart to she who is in the fullness, so that she might prepare a dwelling place for the aeons, meaning a womb. And so Seth would carry the aeons within him, and that would be also Christ carrying the aeons, or the truth, or the pleroma within himself, that were going to descend. And so they descended and were then injected into the womb of Eve, and then Seth was birthed. And that's what you have. And so you have these two groups. You have those that are of the aeons that are always were from the beginning, and that's the perfect human. And then you have those that descended as they are creations of the demiurge and the seed of the demiurge. And this is what you have. And this group within the Hebrews would war against each other within their own nation. And now let's take this into perspective, because what's going on outside of the nation of Israel at this point, or the Hebrews up to this point, they're called Hebrews, and the nation of Israel did not come about until there were the 12 sons. I believe it was Jacob. But the Hebrews up to this point, outside of that, there were already Gentiles who were created by Sophia, and the heavens and the earth, the Elohim, had already created everybody to evolve at a natural pace, whereby they were up to a point in their evolution that they would begin to have access to gnosis, or the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And this is where the demiurge intervenes, knowing that the Gentiles would have access to gnosis. They were in their capacity to have awareness in their evolution, begin to question beyond the Jehovah God, where they came from, so forth and so on, and look within themselves to find gnosis. So the demiurge then intervenes and then creates the Hebrew race. And the Hebrew race know that they are a different creation. They call those that are not Hebrew Goyim. Everybody that is Jewish today, or Jew, would be considered to be the chosen people of God. And of course, their God is the demiurge, or Jehovah. And that's what we have. And so now, again, I want to remind you, as often is the case, when people hear this truth, they will take it and run to give them a reason or an excuse as to why they have a right to discriminate against Jewish people. Now, I want to remind you that Christ himself was of the seed of Seth, and so Christ himself was born Jew. So you can't in the same breath call yourself a follower of Christ and then go and discriminate against Jewish people. There's nothing in that is logical. Each person has their place. Each group of people have their place. Each race of people or ethnic group of people have their place in the unfolding of the plan from the beginning. You can't think of it in the way that the demiurge thinks of it in terms of superior versus inferior and hierarchical, but you have to understand it according to the way the Mother Father, the monad, the ineffable, the true Father in heaven, and Christ and Sophia consider it, which everything is a tapestry to make up a whole fabric, a story, like various colors that bring about a beautiful design and picture. This is the way you have to think about of it. And you have to remember that every being, whether they are Jew, Gentile, were sewn together as being no different when Christ came. He said, at this point, there is no Jew or Gentile, male or female, rich or poor, in the eyes of God. This was from Christ himself. So you can't be a follower of Christ and then use this as a reason why you can discriminate against Jewish people. Now, having said that, it's also important to realize what you're dealing with. I'm not saying all Jewish people, but it also includes those that follow the Judean religion. A Christian or Muslim who follows Judean religion is no different than a Jew who follows Judean religion. They are from the same cloth. So Gnosticism is the first to only follow Judean religion through the eyes of Seth, or the lineage of the aeonic, or the aeon, the dwelling place of the aeons, which is the fullness, and that's from the pleroma, recognizing the Cain versus the Seth story in this ultimate unfolding. That's what you have to remember. And we'll expound on this in a lot more detail as we go into more and more videos and more Gnostic text. But I think it's important for you to understand that and appreciate what's being said here, that yes, there is forces in the universe. There are forces on Earth that want to maintain a hierarchical system of control. And yes, they are led by Judean forces. But when I talk about Judeo forces, I'm not referring to Jews. I'm referring to any Judean religion that follows after the demiurge, who works through judgment and control and force, and all those types of devices. And those could be Orthodox Christians, those could be right-wing Muslims, so forth and so on. And they don't even necessarily have to be religious per se, as in the way we think of religion. Anybody that has a dogmatic, authoritative approach to life and bringing about the good in a society and what they deem to be good, and using it through authority and force and laws and coercion, war and mayhem, that's from the demiurge. Okay, so now let's continue. And it says, and they were made to drink water of forgetfulness. And this is Adam and Eve. So once Adam and Eve had brought forth Seth, at that point the chief ruler stepped in and shrouded them in forgetfulness by the chief ruler, so that they would not know themselves and would not know where they had come from. And the seed existed like this for a while. So they were in ignorance for quite some time, providing assistance so that when the Spirit descends from the holy aeons, it will correct the seed and heal it from the deficiency, so that the entire fullness might become holy and without deficiency. So this is saying that the seed that was within Adam and Eve, when Adam had intercourse with Eve, that seed was actually in Eve for a very long time. So perhaps it was longer than 9 months, as it was the storehouse of all the truth in the universe and existence. And that was guarded by Eve. And this is where the chief ruler did not understand that by shrouding Adam and Eve in more and more darkness, he was essentially covering up the light even more and more, so that he would be even less likely to even recognize it or see it. The demiurge is using humanity, or mankind, in order to find his way, like a lantern that he carries in the dark. And so he's just shrouding it and making it more and more dim. And so he's making it more and more difficult for him to be able to see where he's going. And thus he becomes even more of a dark lord of sorts. So initially he wasn't that bad, but as he goes out and does more and more acts of creating means to shroud the light, the more and more he falls into darkness. Verse 23. Now here we're going to get into a transition, and it's going to talk about what happens to the souls after death. We're going to stop at the end of this verse because it's a lot of material here, even though it's just one verse. I said to the Savior, that's Christ, Lord, will all the souls be delivered into the pure light? Now, couple things you have to recognize here. Number one, it says souls. It doesn't say spirit. The next thing is it talks about the pure light. And so this means John recognizes that there is light, a dim light, and that's the artificial light that was talked about earlier, that is in this universe, and that's the left and right-hand path. The demiurge has a type of good that he uses. That's that light, but it's not a pure light. That's why he's differentiating between light versus pure light. And so this is what you have to remember, is you have to hone in on this word soul, because it's not saying spirits. So we're talking about the souls here. What happens to the souls, not to the spirits? He replied, saying to me, this Christ says, these are great things I have arisen in your thinking. He's saying, I am really noticing that this is really inspiring in you, the capacity to touch into a deeper gnosis. For it is difficult to disclose these things to any others except those who are from the immovable generation. So John is getting it on a level that few get, because he's recognizing that there are different levels to the human being. And he's seeing, okay, I get it. There's a soul, there's a spirit, and there's a body. Those upon whom the spirit of the life will descend, and this is saying that that so, will have the spirit of life descend upon in them, and that means that gnosis is brought to them, and with whom it will be powerfully present. In other words, not only does it descend, but that person carries that light with them and lives with it, meaning that they are not only knowledgeable about that gnosis, but they're living the example that Christ set forth about the gnosis. They will be saved and will become perfect. So here it's saying that they'll be saved from this ram known as the kanoma, the matrix, and will become full. Remember, that word perfect has two connotations. One is the individual is already perfectly created by the monad, the mother father, perfectly. Intrinsically, they are perfect. The other perfect is the state of the being in action. Are they empty? Are they incomplete? Or are they complete? Here it's referring to the second. It's saying that they will be saved from the kanoma and will become full. That is, if they carry the light within them and then they bring forth wisdom. And so they take on the Christ and the Sophia. Christ being the gnosis, Sophia being the wisdom. So gnosis is the understanding of all this truth that's being presented to you, and that you have faith in it and you believe in it. But wisdom is what you will gain, the fullness that you will gain in putting into action that gnosis. That's the wisdom that you gain, that fills you up. And they will become worthy of the great realms. And again, the worthiness is not that God sees them as worthless or worthy, but that they see themselves as worthy. And the great realms here are the realms beyond the seventh realm, which is where the demiurge reside. So all the realms above that. And so they'll be able to enter into the 8th, 9th, 10th, all the way up to the 13th realm. And there's 13th realms. And 13th realm is where the monad resides. And they will be purified in that place from all evil, all division, and the concerns of wickedness. Now, wickedness comes from that word that we get, words like wick, wiccan, wisdom, witch. All of these refers to those that use an artificial light to find wisdom. But in so doing, they still are practicing some type of wisdom, but it's a watered-down version of wisdom. So therefore, it's wicked. It's sort of a disfigured embodiment of wisdom. So it's not really Sophia, but it's an artificial or disfigured Sophia. Now, wisdom is far better than foolishness, certainly, but wisdom will only take you so far. So being a witch, being a Wiccan, all these things maybe can give you something in this realm, but it's going to expect something back, because wickedness works within the demiurge's realm of karma, where you will be taken what you have been given, and you will be given what was taken. That's the cycle of good and evil that works on and feeds on itself. Then they will not take care for anything except the imperishability alone. And that person gets to a place where they no longer have attachments to this realm, attending to it from this point on without anger or envy or jealousy or desire or greed or anything at all. For they are not restrained by anything except the reality of the flesh alone, which they bear while fervently awaiting the time when they will be visited by those who will receive them. It's saying here that they are only thinking about being purified or being released from the flesh, which they bear while fervently awaiting the time when they will be visited by those who will receive them. For such as these are worthy of the imperishable eternal life and the calling, enduring everything, bearing everything, so that they might complete the contest and inherit eternal life. And here Christ is referring to this life as like a game, right? A contest. He calls it a contest. As it goes on, it says, and John said to Christ, Lord, will the souls of those upon whom the power of the Spirit of life descended, but who did not do these works be excluded? So he's referring to now, how about those that have gnosis, but they don't do anything with that knowledge? Christ said, if the Spirit descends upon them, they will be saved in any case. And why is that? The reason is it's the gnosis. Christ saves you. Sophia doesn't save you. Christ saves you from this realm. But Sophia is the one that's going to fill you along with Christ. They work together to fill you as a consorts. But what it's saying here is that yes, you're going to be saved from this realm, but you're not going to be full. You still won't be complete. So you may have a desire to come back to this realm, is really what it's saying. Now, you may or may not go back. Depends on when you want to come back to do your fulfillment. This is what it's saying. And if the Spirit descends upon them, they will be saved in any case, and they will migrate. So they will go up the ladder of the realms. They will go higher from the third realm, fourth, fifth, seventh realm. For the power will descend upon every human being. So they'll be moving toward the pleroma. And the eighth, ninth, and up to the pleroma, they're not going to necessarily enter there. For without it, no one is able to stand upright. After they are born, then if the spirit of life increases, and the power comes to strengthen that soul, it is not possible to lead it astray into the works of the wickedness. So the wisdom of this world is different from the wisdom of Sophia. But anyway, they're going to gain through different incarnations, is what Christ is really saying. That ultimately, that perhaps the Spirit in them will increase their power and their strength in their soul, and they'll no longer be led astray by this realm. But those upon whom the counterfeit spirit descends are drawn by it, and they are led astray. Christ is essentially saying that this individual, yes, they have the opportunity to be saved, but it's really going to be up to them. They're going to migrate toward the pleroma, but they may decide to come back because they still have attachments, or they may not. But ultimately, they are in a position to be saved. John says to Christ, Lord, then when the souls of those leave their flesh, where will they go? So this is really very astounding of John to recognize this. That he's really pointing out that the souls actually leave the body. He sees this. He understands this by what Christ is describing. He laughed and said to me, the soul in which the power will become stronger than the despicable spirit. For this one, the soul is powerful, and it flees from evil. So where does it go? It's going to leave division. It will be saved by the visitation of the incorruptible, and it will be admitted into the repose of the aeons. And here the repose of the aeons is somewhere between the 8th and 9th realm. So that's where the soul goes when it leaves the flesh. So the flesh dies and the soul goes to the 8th and 9th realm to determine whether or not it's go to the pleroma or back to the kenoma. That's what Christ is saying here. I said, Lord, then where will the souls be who do not know to whom their souls belong? So this is saying, well, what if a person can't make up their mind about who they are? He said to me, in those, the despicable spirit, and what is the despicable spirit? The despicable spirit is that artificial spirit talked about prior, which is the spirit generated and created by the demiurge, that purpose that one has, according to the demiurge, as to why our attachments, essentially our ego. The despicable spirit has proliferated by leading them astray. He burdens the soul and draws it into works of wickedness, and he casts it down into forgetfulness. So if you don't know who you are, then the demiurge will give you a name, will create one for you, essentially is what it's saying here. So when the question becomes, well, what happens, what determines if we come back, who will be? Well, if you are the one that has gnosis, but you don't necessarily do the work, then you will determine that. You'll say, this is my contract, this is what I'd like to accomplish, this is the work I'd like to do to continue to fill my spirit. But if you don't know who you are, then you're not going to be able to know to do that. So you're not going to have a choice. Then the demiurge will step in and give you a name and will decide for you what body you'll take, what race, what economic status, what nation, so forth and so on. The demiurge would do that for you because you haven't done it for yourself, and you've been led astray, and you don't know because you've forgotten who you are. You've forgotten your name, and that you even have the power to create your own name. And so the demiurge does it for you, along with karma and so forth and so on. He follows after karmic will. After it comes forth, they hand it over to the authorities who came into being through the ruler. So once that name's created, he then gives it over to his archons. And they bind it in chains and cast it into prison, and prison is earth. Not only are they going to give you a name, but they're going to give you lots of trials and tribulations, forgetfulness. They're going to make sure that you don't remember. They're going to make it even more difficult for you. And they consort with it until it awakens from forgetfulness and receives knowledge. So here it's talking about not only are they going to increase forgetfulness, but at the same time that experience is going to bring in you knowledge and experience. And so in this way, it is perfected and saved. So in other words, there's nothing you can do, nothing the demiurge can do, nothing that the archons can do to prevent you from gaining knowledge by experiencing life. If you experience coming back, you're going to gain more and more experience, right? And have more and more opportunities for wickedness or wisdom, gaining a type of artificial wisdom, which ultimately is better than no wisdom at all, which is going to migrate you toward and move you toward the pleroma. And so it's inevitable, is what Christ is really saying. It's just slower for some than others. And then John said, Lord, how does the soul become smaller and return back into the nature of its mother, or the human? So John is thinking of this as like he thinks of the flesh body. He's thinking like the soul must be some kind of entity. And so how does that soul enter back into the womb of the mother? How's that possible? And then Christ rejoiced when he asked this, and he said to me, truly you are blessed, for you have understood that the soul is made to follow another who has the spirit of life in it. So John is not asking this, it sounds like, by the way Christ answered, because he doesn't know, but he suspects he knows the answer. He's suspecting that the spirit is not like the body, perhaps, that it is different, and that it isn't about three-dimensional space. And so this is like an astounding moment, right? That Christ sees that John recognizes this, and he says that you're blessed that you understood this, that the soul is made to follow another who has the spirit of life in it. Well, it's following after whatever you left behind, your debris, I would say your personality debris that's left there already. It's leaving a space for you, basically. It isn't full yet. And so it's just going back into that receptacle or that vessel that you have made for yourself, that you call your name. But in this case, it says the soul is made to follow another who has the spirit of life in it. So that spirit of life, he doesn't say exactly what it is. He says follow another. It could mean that you're following an artificial one, and so you're kind of wasting your time because the demiurge makes a name for you, or you're following the one that you worked on prior, and so you continue that. So he just says it's another, who knows, who has the spirit of life in it. So the spirit is already there, but the receptacle or the vessel isn't full yet. It's not complete, it's not perfected yet. And so you'll continue that work, is what he's saying here. But nonetheless, it is saved by that other one. So it's saying that because it began the work and you're coming back to continue the work, ultimately you're going to become full. Then it is not cast into another flesh. So ultimately it means that they'll no longer have to be reincarnated. And I said, Lord, what about those who understood and yet turned away? In other words, how about people that know all this truth the gospel truth being presented to them about gnosis, and then they don't do anything about it, or they don't accept it, they don't believe in it, they don't do anything? Where will their souls go? Now remember, we're talking about souls, we're not talking about spirits. The spirits are all saved, as Christ keeps saying, the spirit of life, this individual saved, this one saved, so forth. Nobody so far has not been saved. And then he said to them, they will be admitted into that place where the angels of poverty go. So who are these angels of poverty? The place where repentance does not occur. And we're talking about the soul here, we're not talking about the spirit. And so those souls are going to be allowed into a place where angels of poverty. The angels of poverty are those that have no spirit. They're poor in spirit, right? So they're going to be admitted into perhaps the fourth through the seventh realm, is what it's saying. And this is a place where there is complete ignorance, and the archons and the demiurge don't recognize gnosis. In fact, they fight against it. And so these people will actually be allowed to transcend and to get rank, so to speak, so that they can work alongside with the archons, be rulers of the world and kings and queens and all this stuff, right? And they will guard them until that day when those who have blasphemed against the Spirit will be tortured. So what it's saying here is that they'll continue to work alongside, and they'll even be guarded by those angels, those archons, and the demiurge. They'll be protected by them because they're special, you see, because they're like light to the heavens where the demiurge and their archons reside. They're special. They're going to reward them. But here's the thing. It says, and they will guard them until that day, and this is when they will stop guarding them, when those who had blasphemed against the Spirit will be tortured. Now, it doesn't say that the souls that know gnosis but don't accept it or do the work are going to be tortured, but it says, and they will guard them. It's talking about the archons, the devil and his angels, or the demiurge. When they stop guarding them, it says, will guard them until that day when those who have blasphemed against the Spirit will be tortured. So until they can no longer take it, basically is what it's saying. It'll be arduous for them, and they will be punished with an eternal punishment. Where else have we heard that eternal punishment? We've heard that in Revelations, which is the eternal a lake of fire. Now, if you go by proto-Orthodox understanding of those verses, you will believe that means fire that burns forever and ever and ever and ever, and the person will be tortured forever and ever and ever and ever, day and night, and will never end. And that's the way you'll understand those scriptures, because that's the way you've been taught, and your propensity is to really want to hang on to that, because you've been taught, not only you were taught that, but your parents taught you that, and their parents taught that, and so forth and so on, as how you should interpret those scriptures. But think of it another way, because a couple things will hint in on a different way to understand what it means when it talks about eternal punishment. Think about someone who's on death row, and the judge will throw the gavel down and say you're guilty, and your sentence is to be put to death. And so that punishment is a type of punishment that's never going to end, right? Because it's going to last forever. Back in the day when Christ walked the earth, and among the Jewish people of the time, the Hebrews, the Israelites, when they said eternal punishment, what they were referring to is an actual physical place called Gehenna. And that place was where they would throw all their trash and all the dead bodies and everything, and it would be burning, and you see smoke go up, and it would burn all the time. It would never stop burning. And whatever the trash was, whatever the dead bodies, they throw it into that place, and that was a place called the place of eternal punishment. And so that's what's referring to. When people were punished, they either would be on the cross, which was called a crucifixion, or they were given eternal punishment. And when they were told they were going to be given eternal punishment, they knew that that punishment meant they were going to be thrown into the lake of fire known as Gehenna, and they would burn forever and ever, day and night, and they'd be weeping of gnashing of teeth without end. Meaning, in other words, their sorrow, their pain would echo for all of eternity, as a type of punishment that would be an example to everyone for all time. That's what it's referring to. What's going to drive that home is that right after that in Revelation, when it says the lake of fire that burns forever and ever, it says the second death, and death is the ending of everything, right? So the soul is the second death. The first death is flesh, the fleshly death. The second death is the soul. Once the flesh is gone and the soul is gone, then the spirit is released, you see. And so even these people that deny gnosis, they will finally recognize the walk, the way of having to gain the fulfillment of who they are, finding their name. Because when they are in the heavens with the demiurge and his archons, at first it will be happy, prideful kind of experience, like, look at me, I got rewards and I got a crown on my head. But this will go on for a long time, to the point at which eventually it will be torturous for them. They'll be released once the souls, or the artificial spirits of the archons and the demiurge, are cast into eternal punishment, or the eternal lake of fire. And this is symbolic, you see. So it's saying that even the demiurge and his archons, their spirits will eventually be burned away. The light will be burned away, and they will no longer have a artificial spirit or soul. And at that point, they'll no longer have the capacity to have a grip on these last type that Christ is explaining to John, the ones that understood but yet turned away. So ultimately, all of these individuals, all these souls in the various permutations, are going to make it into the 8th, 9th, and above. But everybody's going to do it at their own pace and in their own way. So it's all about finding your full self, ultimately. But everybody's going to be doing it in a different way. And that's what we have to understand, because the propensity is to read these verses and think it's talking about the Spirit. Well, it makes it very clear it's not talking about the Spirit, because if it were talking about the Spirit, it wouldn't mention soul and spirit in the same paragraph, clearly talking about two different things. All of these questions that John has is referring to the soul. The reason why John is interested in the soul is because that is very profound to him. The understanding of a soul was brought to him by Christ, like fully, what does it mean to be a soul? He now understood, and so he was curious. Well, everybody has a soul, so what happens to that soul? And so he asked Christ, like, well, this person does this, what happens to that soul? So forth and so on. All right, so that's where we're going to leave it, and we'll pick up in the next video on verse number 24. Blessed day.